Proportional representation, why it matters, and how alternative voting methods can get us there. So first we need to say, what is proportional representation? And let me just tell you that throughout this presentation, we're going to use PR as an abbreviation for proportional representation. So it doesn't mean public relations here. So what proportional representation means is that when you have an elected body, such as the state legislature or Congress or city councils, school boards, all kinds of things, you'd like that elected body to resemble the electorate in whatever ways the electorate thinks are most important for that particular contest. So you might want it to look like the electorate in terms of racial diversity. You might want it to accurately reflect the electorate in terms of political party, or in the case of nonpartisan city council elections, there might be some local issues of particular importance where you want all sides represented on the council. So there's a lot of different things that this can mean in practice, but basically it means you want the body to look like the electorate. And there are two main ways that you can elect representatives to multi-member bodies. Probably the one that's most common at most levels in this country is to have single winner elections. And this is actually what the redistricting commissions are all about. You take the state and you chop it up into geographic pieces, and each district or ward elects one person to that body. So the actual elections are single winner elections. And so they're conducted in the same way as elections for a unitary executive, such as governor or president or mayor. But there is another alternative. The other alternative is to have multi-winner contests where you fill two or more seats in the same election on a single ballot. And of course, this only works when you have multi-member bodies. You can't have a multi-winner election for governor, say. But for legislative bodies, you can. And the key message I want you to take away from this talk, if you remember nothing else, is that if you want proportional representation, it requires multi-winner elections. Because single winner elections are always winner take all. Only the majority or the plurality gets the one seat. It doesn't matter if that one seat is won by 51% or 99%, the outcome is the same. And so single winner districts are not a good way to get proportional representation. And I want to show you some actual examples of this. So one of the ways that it's not a good way to get proportional representation is that you just end up with extremely non-competitive elections a lot of times. What this chart is showing you is Broomfield City Council elections since 2003. So Broomfield has single member ward, well, they have multi-member wards, but each election only elects one member per ward. And so in each of these elections, this chart shows the number of candidates that we're running. And so what we're really highlighting here is the ones. One means that in that election, there was only one candidate, which means voters had no choice whatsoever. And in particular, look at the election from 2011. There was not one single ward that had a competitive election that year. So voters had literally no choice for who their city council member was going to be. That's one of the things that can happen to make single winner elections very non-competitive. So, and it happens frequently, especially when you have smaller bodies. You know, like not so often for congressional elections, but even in state legislative elections, there are often uncontested races. So that's one way that voters get no choice. You know, who you get to see is just an accident of geography, where the candidates live. And the flip side of that is that by accidents of geography, you might have two really awesome candidates who live in the same district, and so they're running for the same seat. And so only one of them can win, and you don't have the option of supporting both of these awesome candidates. So these are some of the problems with competitiveness that can arise in single winner districts. So why does proportional representation matter? Well, the idea is that you want to give every sizable, like-minded voting group representation. And that word like-minded is intended to be very broad here. It can be any cohesive group based on anything: political party, race, religion, geography, opinion on an issue, anything. But the reason why you want this is that it makes the outcomes feel more fair. It makes the voters feel like their voices have been heard and like they are accurately represented in the body. And so they're more engaged in the political process and its outcomes. And a big one is that it eliminates or at least drastically reduces the impact of gerrymandering, which of course is something we're hearing a lot about as redistricting is happening everywhere this year. So what I want to do now is show you some real world examples of how single member districts lead to very disproportionate representation. So the first one I want to talk about is Wisconsin and the results of the 2018 election for the Wisconsin State Assembly, which is the state house in Wisconsin. So the map, the district map, there are 99 seats, and this map was drawn by the Republican legislature, and it's widely considered one of the most extreme partisan gerrymanders in the country right now. This map has been the source of multiple court cases, some of which have gone to the Supreme Court, although mostly no great decisions have been rendered. So here's how the vote went. Statewide, the vote share, Democrats got 53% of the vote, Republicans got 45%, and then 2% went to other minor parties. But Republicans got almost 2/3 of the seats. There are 99 seats in this body, and Republicans got 63% of them. So this was an extremely disproportional outcome. Well, how did they do it in drawing the maps? The classic strategies for gerrymandering are called packing and cracking. So what you do is you take your opponents, if you can, and you pack them very tightly into a few districts that they're going to win by wide margins. So they waste a lot of votes because they spend more votes than they need to win those seats. So these districts are colored not only according to which party won, but by how much. And you see here a whole lot of really dark blue districts. And the code here actually means those districts are so lopsided that those were uncontested races. The Republicans didn't even bother to field a candidate in those races because those were such heavily Democratic districts. And you see they're concentrated in the big cities of Madison and Milwaukee. And there's also this one up in the northern part of the state. But what you don't see is a lot of light blue districts. You don't see a lot of districts that Democrats won by just a little bit, because the companion to packing is cracking. So after you've shoved as many of your opponents into a few districts as you can, you take the rest and you crack them among the remaining districts. So you spread them out so that they'll never have 50%. They'll never be able to win, but they still might be a sizable minority in those districts. So the flip side is you see a lot of light pink districts here that the Republicans won by just a little bit. So that's the way that they could take an election in which they actually lost the popular vote, and yet they can win almost 2/3 of the seats by this packing and cracking. So this really illustrates how gerrymandering can lead to a very disproportional outcome. Okay, let me tell you another story. Massachusetts. Massachusetts also has extremely disproportional representation, this time at the level of Congress. Since 1992, Massachusetts has had either 9 or 10 seats in the US House of Representatives. And in statewide elections, Republicans consistently get 30 to 40% of the vote. So you might think that they would get 3 or 4 of these seats. But in fact, there has not been a single Republican member of Congress from Massachusetts since 1994. So this sure sounds like gerrymandering, right? It's extremely disproportional. And so is this due to gerrymandering? Well, Moon Duchin, who is also a gerrymandering expert and a math professor at Tufts University, she and her collaborators looked at voting data over a 16-year period from 2000 to 2016, and they looked at a variety of statewide elections, and they found something very surprising. So districts generally have to be drawn to be contiguous, right? You don't want part of your district here and then another district way at a different end of the state. They found that even if you drop the contiguity requirement and you just list either precincts or townships in Massachusetts from most Republican to least Republican, and you pick off the most Republican precincts or townships, there are not enough of them to create a majority Republican districts. So it is mathematically impossible to draw a majority Republican congressional district in Massachusetts. It's not gerrymandering. It's literally impossible to do. And the reason for this is that 30 to 40% minority Republicans are distributed very evenly throughout the state. If you want to get minority representation by districting, it only works if the minority is clustered somewhere, if there's some local place where they're a majority. So you can draw a boundary around a place where they have a majority to create a district. And there just isn't anywhere in Massachusetts where Republicans are that tightly clustered. So what this map shows is, as of 2006, where are the most Republican precincts in Massachusetts? And you see they're very spread out. And there's only a very few of them that are dark red. You know, even the most Republican precincts in Massachusetts are not that majority Republican. It's a slight majority. So their paper concludes with this fantastic assessment. They say, we argue that the underperformance of Republicans in Massachusetts is not attributable to gerrymandering, nor to the failure of Republicans to field House candidates, but it is a structural mathematical feature of the distribution of votes. For several of the elections studied here, there are more ways of building a valid districting plan than there are particles in the galaxy, and every one of them will produce a 9-0 Democratic delegation. So the takeaway message here is that, yes, gerrymandering is bad. It can produce very disproportional outcomes, but eliminating gerrymandering is not going to fix all the problems with single winner districts. It's not magically going to produce proportional representation, even if all the districts are drawn in good faith. So the National League does have a position on this. In brief, the League supports electoral systems at each level of government that encourage participation, are verifiable and auditable, and enhance representation for all voters. And specifically about proportional representation, the League supports electoral systems that elect policymaking bodies that proportionally reflect the people they represent. We support systems that inhibit political manipulation, such as gerrymandering. So, what do we mean by proportional representation in practice? Say you have 3 sides of an issue, and the voter expressed preferences look roughly like this pie chart: 40%, 38%, 22%. So no position has a majority. And you're going to elect 5 members to somebody, say a city council. A 5-winner proportional representation result would look like this. You might expect each of the 2 major factions to get 2 seats, and then a minor faction to get 1 seat. That would make everybody in the electorate feel represented. But what often happens in practice is that even with a tiny plurality, 40% versus 38%, the group with the plurality often wins everything, and you get a non-proportional result. This illustration comes from what's called a block voting result, and we're going to talk a little more about that later. But that's the idea here, is that we would really like something that looks more like this bottom pie chart for an outcome. So for the remainder of this talk, we're going to follow Vera Voter as she participates in her hometown city council election. Vera's city has exactly 1,000 voters, which is going to make the math easy. For those of you who've had the opportunity to look at our single winner presentation, and if you haven't, I highly encourage you to do so. In that presentation, we followed Vera's twin sister, Vicky Voter, as she voted in her town's mayoral election with several different methods. So what we're going to do here is we're going to let Vera vote in this election several times using different methods. We're going to wave our magic wand every time we rerun the election. And here are the council candidates. There are 4 seats to fill. There are 2 main factions, A and B, which will each run 4 candidates. There's also sort of a smaller faction C, but that's only going to run 1 candidate, Carla. Vera generally prefers the A candidates, although the B candidates are somewhat more popular and they have a plurality of support in the city. The first way that Vera gets to vote is in what's called a plurality block election. This is the system that Boulder currently uses to elect its city council. It's used to elect city councils in a lot of places around the country. And the ballot lists all the candidates running, and Vera gets to vote for 4, since that's the number of seats there are to fill. And of course, since she prefers the A candidates, she votes for all of them. Alicia is her favorite, but she prefers all of the A candidates over any of the others. So what's the outcome? You just tally up all the votes, and the top 4 vote getters win the 4 seats. And since the Bs had plurality support, you can imagine what happens. Everybody who supports the As vote for the As. Everybody who supports the Bs vote for all the Bs. And so the Bs get the most votes because they have a plurality of support. And Vera is completely shut out. None of her preferred candidates get a seat on this council. So you can probably see why this system is problematic. A number of cities have been sued on the basis of non-proportional outcomes, mostly for in cases where there's a racial group that doesn't get represented. And some courts have ruled in favor of the plaintiffs and said, yes, this system is not giving that group adequate representation according to the Voting Rights Act, and you have to switch to something else. And the most common remedy that is suggested in court for this is to move to a district system. So we're now going to wave our magic wand. Vera is going to get to vote again after her city has been divided up into 4 districts. So Vera lives in District 4, and this time her ballot only lists 2 candidates, Amy and Ben. Her favorite, Alicia, lives in District 1, so she doesn't get to vote for her favorite, but she does prefer Amy over Ben. So this is how she votes. What's the outcome? Well, the same thing happens because there's not much geographic clustering of the groups in this city. The A's and the B's are pretty evenly split out, and so the B's still have a majority in every district. And Vera didn't even get a chance to say whether or not she supported Carla, because Carla could only run in District 3 where she lives. So the voters in the other districts didn't get to express an opinion about her. So both of these produced very non-proportional outcomes. And so we'd like to have a better way. We'd like to have better voting methods that produce more proportional outcomes. And I'm now going to turn it over to Celeste, and she's going to tell you about a variety of better options. At least I think she is. There we go.
I think I've unmuted myself. I hope everybody can hear. Here's the slide that we just saw. Let me go ahead and put it in present mode. Okay. Hope we're all still here. Okay. So we're going to have 3 proportional representation methods to solve this problem of lack of representation of the voters. There's also another method that's used widely in other countries called party lists, but that only ensures proportional representation by political party. And Americans tend to like their independence, and many do not affiliate with the party. So the party list option is not discussed very much in the United States. Instead, we're going to discuss these 3 that are highlighted in different colors, and as we go through, the slides will also be highlighted in these same colors. If you saw the single winner version, you saw these 3 ballot types. The first one is proportional approval voting. The second one is allocated score voting. And then single transferable vote uses a ranked ballot. So let's wave our magic wand and look at our proportional approval voting ballot. Just like in single winner approval voting, you can vote for as many candidates as you like. And Alicia, as you know, supports all of the A candidates, but let's see what she does. She's also going to show some support for Carla. One strategy when you're doing an approval voting ballot is to vote for everybody that you like, or vote for everybody that you like and don't vote for anybody that you really don't like. So, you know, if you really don't like one candidate, you could vote for everybody except that one candidate. And that's not exactly what she's doing, to some extent. Let's see how you tally this result. It's a little more complicated than single winner approval voting, because we want all the different groups to be represented. The first thing you do is you consider all the possible combinations of 4 winners. So I started listing them here. There's a big gap in the middle. We're not going to list them all. And then the tabulation calculates how satisfied each voter would be with each possible combination. So of course, Vera would be more satisfied with the first listing, Alicia, Mira, Alba, and Amy, than she would be with Blanca, Bjorn, Ben, and Carla. And for you calculate across the entire electorate for each combination, and the combination of 4 winners with the highest satisfaction will provide more representation and is the winner. So how do you quantify this voter satisfaction? Well, if none of your candidates win, then you won't be very satisfied and the satisfaction score is a 0. If one of your candidates wins, you're considered somewhat satisfied and you have a score of 1. If 2 of your candidates win, it's not as much, you don't get 1 + 1 for your score. The scores are lower for each subsequent winner in order to allow other people to have some satisfaction too. So in this case, the first winner is a score of 1. When you get a second winner, you add a half. A third winner, you add 1/3. A fourth winner, you add 1/4. So the highest possible satisfaction you can get is 2 1/12. Because Vera voted for 5 candidates, she has a number of different ways of getting that score of 2 1/12. If you only vote for 3 candidates, you'll never get a possible score of 2 1/12. But you will still be able to get your biggest number 1 score. So an important feature of this is that you get a higher overall electorate satisfaction if you have many somewhat satisfied voters than if you have a few extremely satisfied voters. This is opposite from plurality block voting, where the B voters were all extremely satisfied and nobody else was satisfied. So this counters that. Unfortunately, this is computationally intensive behind the scenes, but voters don't have to worry about that because we have computers that take care of that these days. Okay, so the winners are Alicia, Betsy, Blanca, and Carla. You can see that all of the 3 factions got some representation, and Vera's ballot gets a satisfaction score of 1 + 1/2 because 2 of the people that she voted for are elected. So let's wave our magic wand again. Now we see a score voting ballot. In this one, you can score each candidate from 0, which is the worst score, to 5, which is the best score. And because there are 9 candidates and 6 scores, some of the candidates are going to get the same score. It might be 0, but some will get the same score. There was something else I was going to say, which I don't remember right now. Okay, so let's see how you don't have to give out every score, is what I was going to say. If you look at Vera's ballot, she does give every score to a candidate, but that's not required. In fact, strategically, you might want to give your favorites all 5s and everybody else 0s. But if you want to show any gradation of support, then you have that option. Here, the A's get the top scores with Amir and Alba tying at 4. Carla gets a 2. Blanca is Vera's favorite of the B candidates, and she didn't even fill in Ben. Maybe she got tired of filling in the 0s, but Ben's score is identical to Betsy and Bjorn's. So how do we calculate this? Well, you calculate it by rounds. There are 4 rounds and 1,000 ballots. So you take that 1,000, you divide it by 4, and that means that 250 ballots will be allocated in each round of this allocated score election. The first round is easy. You just add up all the scores, see who's got the highest score. In this case, it's Blanca. So what we do is we look at those ballots, and the ballots that have 5s for Blanca, those are her strong supporters. And we set aside the ballots with the highest scores for Blanca. So if 5s are all used up, then we might set aside some of the 4s, and those voters are considered represented. And as you can imagine, a lot of those voters probably voted for some of the other B candidates. So when we look at the remaining 750 ballots, we tally them up, and we see that the highest total score here is Alicia. So she's considered the second winner. Once again, we take the 250 of those 750 ballots that have the highest scores for Alicia, and that would include Vera, because Vera gave her a 5. And we allocate those ballots to Alicia. Now we have 500 ballots. We do the same thing. We see who's got the highest score there. We give 250 of those ballots to that winner, and then we have 250 left and see who wins that round. So the results are Blanca first, Alicia second, Carla third, and Betsy fourth. And as we said, Vera's ballot is allocated to Alicia. Okay, let's wave our magic wand again, and we'll check out single transferable vote. In this method, you rank the candidates. There are 9 candidates. There are 6 possible rankings, so some candidates will not be ranked. You are only allowed to give 1 ranking per candidate. As you can imagine, Alicia will be the first choice. Last time, Amir and Alba were tied, but this time Vera has to decide who's going to be second and who's going to be third. And this is how it all settles in the end. The A candidates are ranked 1 through 4, Carla is 5, and Blanca is 6. And let's talk about the tabulation. Once again, we have 1,000 voters. In order to win, you need 201 votes. Looking back at this ballot, only the first choice votes are counted in the first round. So you can ignore 2nd through 6th choices right now. Right now, Vera's vote goes to Alicia. If Alicia gets 201 votes, she wins. Why 201? Well, there are 1,000 voters and 4 winners. If it were 200 votes, then we could have 5 winners, because 200 times 5 is 1,000. So 201 is the smallest number that ensures only 4 winners. So if you get more than 201 votes in the first round or in any round, the surplus votes are transferred to the next highest candidates on those ballots. So let's look and see the first round. Blanca is highlighted because she got more than 201 votes. She got 19 surplus votes, and we will transfer those votes. And the wonderful thing about doing this is that if you can vote for Blanca and you know that you won't waste any votes, because if your first choice has too many votes or not enough votes, your vote can get transferred to your second choice. So let's look at what happens if you transfer those 19 votes. Nobody else will have 201 votes, so nobody else will be elected yet. So if nobody else is elected, then you look at the least vote getter. In this case, Amy has 30 votes. Even if she gets those 19 votes from Blanca, she still will be the lowest vote getter. So she will be eliminated. And this process of eliminating the lowest vote getter and transferring that vote to the next highest candidate who hasn't yet been elected and hasn't yet been eliminated continues in rounds until 4 candidates get 201 votes, or you have exhausted ballots, because remember, we had more candidates than there were rankings. And you're not required to fill in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th choice. So it could be that the number of candidates remaining equals the number of seats left to fill. So you just say, okay, we have all our winners right now. You can imagine if there were 4 seats to fill and only 4 people running, you wouldn't even need any election because you'd already know who your winners are. So it's similar to that. Okay, what are the results? Blanca won in the first, was the first winner, Alicia the second, Betsy the third, and Carla the fourth. So this is similar to the previous results in the other methods. but the B voters didn't waste their votes as much in this method. And so they got this first and third winner. Vera is somewhat satisfied because she ranked Alicia first and Carla ahead of the B candidates. Let's talk a little bit about STV, single transferable vote, and instant runoff voting. They both use ranked ballots and are frequently referred to as ranked choice voting or RCV. But they're used in different situations. IRV is for single winner elections. It's more widespread than single transferable vote. The Secretary of State and our local league avoid using the RCV umbrella term because it refers to several methods. And it's often misused to refer to other ranked voting methods. Like this year, Denver is considering adopting a different voting method. And people say, oh, Denver used RCV in the early 1900s. That's not true. They used a ranked voting method called Buckland. And we would be happy to share an article with you that we wrote called What is RCV Anyway? That can go into more detail on this and give you little videos to watch explain the different methods. Single transferable vote was used in cities during the progressive era in Boulder from 1917 to 1947. Cambridge, Massachusetts started using it in 1941. East Point, Michigan recently started using it as a result of one of those lawsuits that Jen was talking about. Albany, California just adopted it via a citizens initiative. They all use single transferable vote to elect their city councils. Overseas, you'll often hear that Australia uses RCV. The Senate uses the multi-winner proportional single transferable vote, and they have good representation because of that. Unfortunately, the House is like the US House of Representatives and has single member districts and uses IRV, which is a great method to use for single winner unitary executive offices, but it's not our preferred method for a multi-member body. A short review of these three methods. I don't expect you to be experts on these by any means. With proportional approval voting, you get to vote for all the candidates you support, and the combination of winners with the highest satisfaction across the entire electorate wins. With allocated score voting, you score every candidate and you allocate scores based on which voters are more represented in each round until hopefully everybody gets some representation. And single transferable vote, you rank candidates, you get only one vote. And that one vote is equal to everybody else's one vote. So that means that if 60% of the people like A candidates, then 60% of the elected body should be A candidates. We have a few conclusions to end with. Proportional representation gives representation to sizable groups. You don't have just a majority or a plurality electing an entire body. Proportional representation requires multi-winner elections. And we've shown multiple ballot types, both rating and ranking, which are possible to use in a multi-winner election. And proportional representation empowers voters to choose the attributes that they want represented in each elected body and in each election. And it can change over time. And you're not constrained by geography, which is what happens when you have districts. We have a lot more information on our website, which is listed here. And we also have our email address here. So lwvbc.org, then go to Teams at Work, then voting methods. And I'm going to stop sharing. And we'll take some questions, but I'm actually supposed to be somewhere in 25 minutes. So I might end up scooting out early and letting Jen and Pat answer the questions.
All right, if you want to raise your hands, if you've got some questions that you'd like to ask Jen, that would be great. Sure.